Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Accelerate Your Performance podcast. I'm your host, Janet Pilcher. Thank you for tuning into our show today. This podcast is all about leadership. I don't mean leadership as a position. It's about how we can all see great leadership in action so that we can all be leaders in our organizations. And the focus of leadership connects to the 9 principles framework highlighted in my new book, Hardwiring Excellence in Education. Before we get started, I'd love to tell you about our new book study designed for leaders of all levels who want to grow and lead at the next level. Twice a month, we meet to dig into each chapter of my new book, Hardwiring Excellence in Education. And on one podcast episode prior to the book study, I highlight one of the leaders I highlighted in the book. The next book study is on Principle 4, Develop Leaders to Develop People. That's Chapter 4. Our guest today is Dr. Matt Hillmann, and he's highlighted in Chapter 4. In this episode, we'll talk about the story behind the story as we connect with Dr. Hillmann. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Matt Hillmann back onto our show. Matt is the superintendent of Northfield Public Schools in Northfield, Minnesota. He's served in this position for the past 7 years. Prior to this role, he served in the district as Director of Administrative Services, and prior to that, he was the Director of Human Resources and Technology. Before serving in the Northfield Public Schools District, Matt worked for 6 years for Belle Plaine Public Schools. His roles there included elementary principal, dean of students, and technology coordinator. Matt's had a world of experiences in education, and it shows in the work that he does. He's worked in education for almost 28 years. This year, Matt was named 2023 State Superintendent of the Year for his extraordinary leadership in his district. Last year, Matt was awarded the 2022 Human Rights Award from the Northfield Human Rights Commission. This was in recognition of his work to improve support for immigrant families and for the dedication he demonstrated to listen to the Hispanic community in Northfield. Matt was also recently selected as the president of the Minnesota Superintendents Association. His district has partnered with Studer Education since 2018. Matt is a high-performing leader. In order to move the performance curve in an organization to where people perform at their highest levels, the executive leader must be a high performer. And today we'll discuss how Matt has produced high-performing organizational results. It's with great pleasure that I welcome Dr. Matt Hillmann to our show today. So, Matt, welcome to our show again. I'm so glad you agreed to be with us again.
It's always great to be with you, Janet. I always appreciate our time together. I always learn something from you, and our conversations are always so professionally fulfilling.
Thank you so much. So just as a reminder to our listeners, if you would, just a little bit about yourself and where you've been and how long you've been the superintendent at Northfield Public Schools, just to get our listeners started this morning.
Yeah, you got it. So this is going to be my 29th year in public education coming up this fall. And I grew up in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region, and I have an undergraduate degree in history from St. John's University in New York City, the campuses in Queens. Student taught in the New York City public schools. My mom is the oldest of 8, and she's the only one who had ever left Minnesota of her family. So when I graduated, I moved to Minnesota, and I've worked in 3 school districts. My first year in Minnesota, I substitute taught for an entire year, which was such a great experience for me. Then I worked in a very small town in southwestern Minnesota, 600 students, K-12, taught everything from 4th grade keyboarding to senior high computer programming. I made a mistake of fixing a printer, which then made me the technology director. We were there for 8 years. That's where I met my wife. We were both first-year teachers when we met. Great place, little Medelia, Minnesota. 6 years in Belle Plaine, Minnesota, just outside the Twin Cities metro area. Served there as a technology director and as a principal, curriculum director, assessment, whatever was needed, and both at the junior high level as a principal and at the pre-K 2 level. I've been in Northfield now for 14 years, all in district office positions, things like Director of Human Resources. When I arrived, they learned I had been a technology director, so they added that to my job description then too. And I've served as a Director of Administrative Services and then a superintendent here in Northfield for this is my 8th year as superintendent. Wow. And it is superintendency, I think sometimes, especially right now in our climate, can get a bad rap. It is by far the best job I've ever had. And it's not even close. It's just the opportunity we have to make change every day, Janet, is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I love that you just said what you did because, sometimes we get caught in conversations on the external environment factors that are influencing us, of which we can't really control, right? I mean, if we live by that, then we're going to be miserable probably, but that's not what you do. You really focus on what you can control and the changes that you can make. And I appreciate you saying how fulfilling that is, because that's how you stick your head down and just keep going and doing the right things. And Matt, one of the things that, as we've talked all throughout the years, when I highlighted you in the book on developing leaders to develop people, and highlighted you as a level 5 leader because you are. And so I want to talk about that today on the podcast. And I know that one of the things that you did very specifically was took the performance curve to the next level in your school district. So you looked at the performance curve and you really applied it. Can you share how you actually built the execution process that defined expectations using that curve? Because I think we can all learn from that.
Yeah, I think that clarity is one of the most important things that executive leaders can provide for their organization. Being clear about your vision, being clear about your goals. And then as we had worked through a number of tools over the years, including leader rounding and our employee experience surveys, we really learned that we might assume that people know what performance looks like, right? But they really don't. And making sure that we're explicit and clear about what does high performance look like in our district, regardless of whether you're the superintendent, a principal, a teacher, the night custodian at our middle school, the administrative assistant who is scheduling our buildings. Everyone has a responsibility to make us a high performing organization. So what we determined we would do is bring some staff together to talk about what is high performance, what is low performance. And we started with our administrative team. So our administrative team, which includes central office directors and principals, it's about 20 strong, assistant principals, activities director, community education. For around a year, we worked on identifying really what were the elements of performance that we wanted to describe. And we started to create some of the definitions, more bulleted lists of what are the kinds of attributes that we're looking for in both high performance and low performance. And then it was my responsibility to take that and create really kind of a draft, a beta version, if you will. We then brought in a team of staff members from across the district. We use a work team approach in our district that also came from rounding and from employee experience about how do we provide our staff members with more input into the decisions that affect them every day. And so this work team approach, I think we have like 9 or 10 work teams this summer. Last summer, we had 13 or 14, and one of them was something that ended up being called our core performance expectations team. So we brought a beginning product. We talked through them about how to really make sure that we were using the right words in the right cadence at the right time. We also determined to give examples. That was something that was really important to the team of staff members who were reviewing this initial product, getting it ready for prime time. Because many performance rubrics, they're often ethereal, right? You can, I can probably interpret this a little bit. And so giving some examples, and we've got it on a grid where there's 7 different elements. We describe what is high performance and we give examples for high performance. And then we give the inverse. We give the descriptors of what is low performance. We do not define the solid in the middle, the high solid or the low solid. We have columns for those in the rubric. But we focused on saying at the top end of the spectrum and at the bottom end of the spectrum. And I knew we had gotten it mostly right when a school board member we launched this at our opening convocation in 2022 for the 2022-23 school year. And we have a school board member here in Northfield who right now is on medical leave, but he has been on our school board since 1983.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's an amazing public servant. And
Yes.
Mo came up to me after the presentation and he said, Matt, it's so important that we show both, the high performance and the low performance, because people need to know it and they need to be able to understand what are the examples of it. And that conversation with this veteran school board member helped develop the next part of how we implemented it. We did a monthly webinar. First of all, we did a monthly focus on an element with our administrative team. We did a monthly webinar with all of our staff describing and explaining what the element was, what high performance looked like, what high performance didn't look like, gave it a little bit of shape and substance, worked with it at the building levels as well, and continue to move that forward. What I really learned is that the first thing that happened, Janet, was people, the high performers kind of freaked out a little bit in some ways, because especially if I'm concrete sequential, I read, well, I don't do this every minute of every day. No, you don't. And that was a really good learning experience, because I think sometimes we think a high performer has to perform perfectly all the time. Right. And so we've come up with this colloquialism here that we are all going to visit low performance from time to time, but we can't move there. We can't live there. So the goal of describing it is to say, okay, I'm recognizing I'm in a lower performance mindset right now. Be aware of it and shift back to high performance. And so actually next week, a week from this past Wednesday, we have our team coming back in, our work team coming back in to review our progress and to say, what's next? What's the next step in trying to make sure that this is really part of that the flywheel is turning, Janet, so to speak. That we've institutionalized it, and it's just part of what we do. And I could give you dozens. I could go down the road of talking about how I have leaders who are using it in interviews, how we have people who are talking about it amongst themselves in terms of what does this mean, what doesn't it mean. It's really taking root, and of course, low performers also react a little bit, right? Because they see themselves, and we've had to work through some discomfort, with that. And both as Minnesotans, we like to nurture people, right? And so just trying to help people understand that it's okay. That's where you're at today. How do we move ahead? So I could talk for hours about it. And I think we've made a good start. We are not nearly where we want to be yet, but it is a good example of going slow to go fast.
Yeah, it's such a great way to execute on the performance curve, and then how you really engage people providing input. Matt, I was having a conversation yesterday, and someone was asking, when we look at the 9 principles framework, what makes yours different, or what differentiates you all from what you do? And what you just described is the example. And what I mean by that is we have tools and tactics and pieces and parts, but we're not prescriptive in saying you do it exactly like this, right? You apply it exactly like this. But here are tools and tactics that will give you kind of the foundational components, but figure out what's right for you. And not only figure out what's right for you, but it's that thread of gaining input and getting people involved in the conversation about defining what's right for the organization. And that, to me, when I was had to really reflect on, what do we really try to do when we work with partners? It's that, and that is a great example. When you have leaders like you're really able to take those concepts to the next level, take those tools to the next level, and really engage your team in order to move forward. And then the last thing I'd say with that, people would ask, well, what motivates people, or how do you create buy-in? That, right? What you just described, that's what does it. It's not it's not magic. It's not a talk. It's what you're doing, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think it's also about really developing those always behaviors and what your culture really stands for. And another example, I'm going to give a couple of other examples of how this has really accelerated our organization. I've had the people who have talked to me the most about the core performance expectations have been our operations team. So operational leaders will say, I cannot tell you how awesome it has been to have this document, because I had a staff member who was really starting to move, more toward low performance. And when I visited, I just pulled out, we printed this beautiful, fold out document, and I laid it right down, and we talked through the examples of what had been happening lately. We identified the elements within the core performance expectations of how that was showing low performance, and talked about what do we do to get back to high performance. And I think in educational organizations, we often only think of our instructional staff as, having this real part of culture. But of course, everybody in the organization has nearly half of our staff are operational, maybe a third to a half are operational folks. they're the people who live in the community, right? They're the people who are, talking to folks at the grocery store. And so that was a really powerful component. And then I do think that your culture has arrived when people are willing to tell the executive the same thing the executive has been telling other people. And we had a difficult discussion where I made some errors in moving too fast and not getting some feedback on a policy that was going to impact a lot of our staff. It was a complicated piece. It was a pledge that had come out of a staff group from our budget reduction process. We moved ahead, brought the policy forward publicly, and then realized very quickly that we had not gotten enough input for people to feel like that they could be part of helping implement the policy. And I was a little down about that for a little bit. Yeah. And one of my leaders, real courageous, said, you can lament about this, but you can't live here. We can't live here. And I thought that when you have people who are willing, to tell the person who in the hierarchical scheme of the district, which I think is something that's there for obvious reasons, but we seek a flat structure, where certainly I have responsibility for decision and culture and things like that. But when people feel empowered that they can tell the superintendent, hey, remember that performance thing we talked about? You're not low performing right now, but you can't live in this space where you're at. And I think we have a long way to go with it, but I think those are just a couple of examples, Janet, of how it's impacted our organization.
Yeah, and that it's so important because you're not going to live in that high performance area the whole time. I mean, you're gonna fall back a little bit, but it is the ability of how you get yourself out of that and not stay in there. I love that piece and how people can hold each other accountable. I mean, it's obvious as we're talking, why I highlighted you in the book as a level 5 leader. And as we're talking about, that's performing at the top of the curve. But like you said, we're not going to stay there all the time. We're going to shift back and forth. But how do we reflect on our behavior or take feedback and continue to move and stay in that high performance curve? So I'm going to kind of personalize this to you, Matt, just in, what drives you, as a person and who you are to be that high performing leader?
So, earlier I said that my wife and I met as first year teachers, and we met in a town of 2,000 people, 600 students. We loved it there. It's the kind of place. My wife taught math before she stayed home with our kids. And it's the kind of place where people would call our house at night and ask her for help on problem number 27. And it's the kind of place where you were involved in almost every activity. She would always joke that if she was the line judge for volleyball, we knew we had multiple events that night. And you have a choice early in your career of what is your attitude toward your vocation going to be. And we chose that our mantra is we're going to do good things for kids. So every day when I wake up and I do my morning routine, I think, all right, what good things can we do for kids today? And how can we make our little corner of the world better? And I will say, I'm also probably a little bit foolish in that I still wholeheartedly believe that public education is so essential to the success and the future of our nation that this is what I want to do for my contribution to American democracy. And I know that sounds dramatic, or maybe but I truly wholeheartedly, and maybe some people would say foolishly, believe that public service, is the engine of this nation that allows all of the other things to work well. When public service is functioning well, other things function well. And if public service does not function well, it drags the rest of society down. And so in this time where clearly, we are once again a political hotbed, and anyone who gets upset about politics being part of education doesn't know the history of public education in this country. Right. We are a microcosm of our communities, and what people are talking about or what is controversial in the town square or at the dinner table is going to end up in public education. And you can either lament it or you can say, let's lean in and help society figure this out. So yes, we have challenges. Yes, we have some real challenging and difficult discussions that are happening in the country. But what drives me is, number one, I want to make a difference in the lives of kids, regardless of what position I'm in. I want to make a difference for my community, and I want to make a difference for our state and nation. And I think this is a way that the gifts that I have been blessed with seem to be a way. It has seemed so far that it's meaningful, and it helps move our community forward. So I think that you have to have that heart for this work. And if you don't have the heart for the work, nothing else matters. And so I guess that's where I start at, Janet, for better or for worse.
No, I mean, if we could all kind of keep our minds focused on what you just said, Matt, we would all be better, right? We would be contributing. And those of us who have high regard for public education and really want to make a difference in our world, and from it, if we just keep that focused attention, like you just said. And I love it. It's like, not make excuses for what's occurring right now, but how do we manage through it? Because I love what you said, that, I mean, we are a part of society and the community that's going to be reflective of whatever's going on around us. That's a great position to look at, and your ability to lead the way is, I think, extremely important. As we think about, you bring that to work every day, and what we all know is that the executive leaders are really key. If we don't have good executive leader and an executive team, it's really difficult to be an excellent school district. How do you have those same level 5 expectations of your leaders in the district, the people who you rely on each and every day?
Well, I always think this kind of thing starts with me. And so the first thing that I have to do to have the same expectations of other people is to model them, right? To really show through your actions what you would like to see. I think that's the first thing. People will emulate what the leader in their most immediate leader will do, right? And so I think that from the executive leadership position, modeling what you expect is the first step. And I think the second part of it is there's this right mix that you have to have between having consistency and giving people agency, right? It's this constant tug, it's this constant push and pull of and it's quality pressure. You got to have just enough good pressure for people to know that they are supported and valued, and that they have the ability to lead, and yet they're doing so within a framework, and that we're doing so as a team. And you happen to be a district administrator assigned to be a principal at a building, or a district administrator who's assigned to run our technology department. So I think when we think of it in that way, where we are all district leaders, contributing to our community, and we're doing it in this particular role, I think that's another step, right? That how are we doing this together, yet have enough agency to find purpose in my work, and to be able to have some of that, the art of leadership that we know is so motivating to people. And then I think the other part is being willing to provide feedback. We know the research about annual performance reviews is that they're not all that effective. And so I think one of the important pieces is you cannot coach or develop leaders without being with them. And so I start every day at a school during the school year. It's a change we made last year. I just have a visit with the building administrator, every week, but I have a formal meeting with them every other week. It's a modified rounding tactic. And, we talk through what's coming up. It's their meeting. They bring things. It's both coaching and reflection. At the end of every meeting, I use these words. I say, my specific feedback for you today is, and almost always it's positive, something. And I try to give a specific example of something that they've done to live out our vision, our strategic commitments, accelerate our progress toward our benchmarks, which a lot of people call a scorecard, or something, with the core performance expectations. And then thankfully, not all that often, but from time to time, you do have to have those courageous conversations with people and do it from a place of care, right? In terms of that, you want the person to be aware, you want the person to know what they need to do, and that you are there to support them. It is not a dictatorial piece. It is, here's what the expectation is. Here's how we're going to move toward that expectation. Here's your role in doing it. And here's my role as your leader to help you with it. And I think that, and I will be the first to say that I fail at this. I fail at this too, right? There are times where I haven't given enough specific praise, though that's pretty rare. And there are times where I'm very thoughtful about when someone might need some assistance, what's the right way to go about that, and to be thoughtful. Bad news doesn't get better with age, so you have to get after it. At the same time, If you really do care about the person and their ability to lead, being thoughtful about the approach, clear as kind, as Brene Brown tells us, also doing so in a way that really suggests that you matter to us and we want to help you improve your performance. And so thankfully in my role, the vast majority of it is being able to talk about specific positive things. But I think we also need to be willing to lean into those difficult conversations.
Yeah, so good. One thing I just wrote down from what you said when you were talking about consistency and agency, and I, just learned something from that in making sure we hardwired in our heads that consistency does not necessarily mean rigidity, right? I mean,
Correct.
there's fluidness in consistency. I just so important. It's such an important concept, and I'm like, I don't think we say that enough. Like, I don't think we talk about that enough and what that looks like, Matt. That's really good.
It's not about being at the exact same longitude and latitude, Janet, in my opinion. It's about being within a few city blocks of each other.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, so good. And as we close today, one of the, as I'm closer to the end of my career, I mean, leadership is everything to me. I mean, I just believe in it so much. I've been fortunate to be in leadership positions most of my life. And it's more important than ever. And, maybe it's because I am where I am and looking back, and maybe it's always been that important. But I also, sometimes when we're talking to leaders, superintendents, executive leaders, or other leaders in K-12, I'm not sure, not that they don't want to, or not that they're not, not capable, but I'm not sure that they're really looking at leadership as something that's core to moving the organization forward. We might talk about instructional leadership, which is really important, but we're talking about just being a good leader and a good leader of the organization and applying great leadership skills. And that's not necessarily part of a natural conversation, right? If that makes sense. It is with people we work with, Matt, but I mean, when you look at the broader scope of things, it's just not been part of our natural conversation in K-12 to me in the way that it probably needs to be, and even more important to be in the future. So as we kind of close, what advice or what recommendations could you advise to your colleagues, superintendent executive colleagues, of how important leadership is in order to really build great K-12 systems?
We all know that leadership matters. Leadership matters in every way, every day. It is essential to having any kind of cohesive progress toward making your organization better. And leadership can't be, it is not passive, right? It is not a spectator sport. I think that we can sometimes fall into the trap of leading through email or documents or things like that. And so I think the couple of things that you could talk hours on this, right? But if I were to boil it down to a couple of things that I think that are important, is that leadership, as a leader, you need to be able to have people who are willing to go along with you for the journey. And that starts and ends with trust. And trust is very complicated to unpack, right? As my grandmother used to say, it can take years to build trust and only seconds to lose it. And I think it's a complicated thing that we are always trying to seek, because if we have trust, you will, it's rocket fuel for culture, right? You will launch forward. People are going to be willing to do things that they might not have been willing to do before, because they trust the leader and they believe in the vision, right? They trust you, so they believe in the things that you're bringing forward. So I think trust is the most important thing. I think that you can develop trust only in a handful of ways. One is by being immersed in the culture. You cannot lead from your office. You have to lead. You have to be where the people are, right? And so, yes, there's work that you have to get done as the executive of the organization. But if you're not in your school, seeing what's going on firsthand, it's going to diminish the ability for you to have trust. I think trust also comes from acting in a trustworthy way. So doing what you're saying you're going to do, acting decisively when necessary, having the humility to say I was wrong and we need to fix this. And I had to do that a couple times this year, and it's always difficult because you think people are going to think less of you, and some people do, but most people are like, okay, yeah, everybody makes mistakes. We named it, we corrected it, and we moved forward. I think trust is all of those things and more. I think the other part is, do not undervalue the immense power of communication. The leader has to be the primary communicator of the district, and making sure that you are that communication at all levels is happening regularly. I think if I were to talk about those two things today, those would be the two things I would say that come back to that executive. And of course, there's so many more than that, Janet, but
Yeah.
I think if you start with those two, I consider them to be domino elements that then you get a number of other things for free.
Yeah. So good. And, what I hear you say too is with trust and communication, they go hand in hand in many ways. But what you've done is very intentional, right? It's intentional. It's not, when we build trust, we're doing intentional acts. We're being intentional about the work that we do. And that's the leadership when we're developing and coaching and supporting leaders. That's the significance of putting time to that, because it doesn't just happen without dedicating some time to developing ourselves in ways that build the trust and help us communicate in ways that continue to build the part of the organization which you talked about, which is building consistency of practice, but with a lot of fluidity that allows people to provide input and influence in a way that makes sense. You do it. You are one of the best, Matt. I so enjoy having these conversations and always learn from you on these talks. So just appreciate you so much. I hope that people, our leaders, take what you say and really reflect and think through that and figure out, what does that mean to me and how do we move forward? Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure, Janet, and the feeling is totally mutual. I so appreciate the work that you are doing to help make us all better leaders and creating the space and challenging us and supporting us in ways that help us grow and do better things for kids every day. So thanks for your leaning into the work and helping us get better.
I think you can see from this interview why Matt is a level 5 leader. He is such a model for all of us to follow. And I was taking notes during the time that we were talking today, because I always learn so much from Matt. Matt, again, I'm so appreciative of you and what you do and your contributions to the education profession. You are truly a remarkable leader. Back to our book study. Please join our virtual book study that I told you about at the beginning of the show. So if you want to do that, please head to studereducation.com/Hardwiring Excellence. We'll dive into each chapter of the newly released book. And if you want to grow as a leader, this book club is for you and a way for you to connect to your colleagues around the country. The next book club meeting is next Monday. We'll meet twice monthly through November 13th. I hope you join us. Also, we've got our special event this fall, What's Right in Education, coming up. Please feel free to join us there. You'll hear from your colleagues. You'll get to meet your colleagues. You'll hear a number of the stories behind the stories and great results that are being accomplished in our educational institutions across the country. Please join us. As always, I look forward to connecting with you next time as we continue to focus on the 9 principles framework so that we can be our best at work. Have a great week, everyone.